2,000 years ago, this place doesn't exist. Not as a city. The River Thames flows through marshland and forests. Small Celtic tribes fish its waters, hunt in the woods. Nothing suggests what's coming. Then, in 43 AD, the Romans arrive. 4 legions cross the Channel. Within months, they're building a bridge across the Thames. They call the settlement Londinium. It starts as a military outpost, a crossing point, a place to control the river. But rivers mean trade. Trade means money. Money means people. By 60 AD, Londinium is thriving. Merchants from across the empire are doing business here. Wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain, pottery from North Africa. The docks are busy. Warehouses fill up. Wealth accumulates. Then everything burns. Queen Boudica of the Iceni tribe has had enough of Roman occupation. Her rebellion sweeps south. When she reaches Londinium, she shows no mercy. The city is razed. Archaeological digs still find a thick layer of red, burnt earth from this destruction. Thousands die. The Romans rebuild, stronger this time. They construct a defensive wall, parts of which still stand today in the financial district. By 100 AD, Londinium is the capital of Roman Britain, complete with amphitheaters, bathhouses, and a governor's palace. At its peak, maybe 60,000 people live here, but empires don't last forever. Around 410 AD, Rome pulls out. The legions are needed elsewhere. Londinium is abandoned. Not overnight, but gradually. The stone buildings crumble. The roads crack. Nature reclaims what Rome built. For nearly 2 centuries, London is barely a village. The population crashes to maybe a few thousand. Germanic tribes, Angles and Saxons, settle in Britain. They prefer the countryside. Cities remind them of Rome, of occupation. They avoid Londinium. Then Christianity changes everything. In 604 AD, a cathedral is founded on the site of what will become St. Paul's. The church brings organization, literacy, record-keeping. Slowly, trade returns. By the 9th century, London is becoming important again. King Alfred the Great recaptures it from the Vikings in 886. He fortifies the old Roman walls, encourages settlement. The city starts growing again, spreading beyond its ancient boundaries. But the Vikings aren't finished. They keep coming back. Raids, sieges, battles. In 1016, the Viking Canute becomes King of England. But even under Danish rule, London keeps growing. The pattern is set. Whoever controls London controls England. This becomes brutally clear in 1066, when William the Conqueror takes the throne. After defeating Harold at Hastings, William marches straight to London. The city submits. William understands power. He builds the Tower of London, a massive stone fortress, right on the edge of the city. It's a statement. I'm watching you. The tower still stands over 950 years later, one of London's most recognizable landmarks. Medieval London is a city of contradictions. Magnificent churches next to open sewers. Wealthy merchants living beside desperate beggars. By 1300, the population reaches 80,000. London Bridge, completed in 1209, is packed with houses and shops. It's the only bridge across the Thames for 600 years. Trade guilds control the economy. The fishmongers, the mercers, the goldsmiths. These aren't just professions. They're power structures. They elect the mayor of London. They negotiate with kings. The city has its own laws, its own courts. Kings need London's money, and London knows it. But medieval life is brutal. No sanitation, no clean water, no concept of hygiene. Animals are slaughtered in the streets. Waste is dumped in the Thames. Disease is constant. Then, in 1348, the worst arrives: the Black Death. Ships from continental Europe bring rats, and rats bring fleas, and fleas bring plague. Within months, it's a catastrophe. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. Mass graves are dug outside the city walls. Entire families are wiped out. By the time it ends, at least half of London's population is dead. Maybe more. The city is traumatized, depopulated, economically devastated. Recovery takes decades. But London has something other cities don't: location. It controls access to England's richest agricultural region. It sits on a navigable river connecting to the sea. It's the perfect place for trade. By 1500, London is back, bigger than ever. And then religion tears England apart. Henry VIII's break from Rome in the 1530s reshapes London permanently. When Henry dissolves the monasteries, the Catholic Church loses everything. In London, the Church owns roughly a third of all land. Henry seizes it. Suddenly, there's space. Aristocrats buy up former monastic properties and build estates. Wealthy merchants do the same. The city expands westward toward Westminster. Under Queen Elizabeth I, London becomes Europe's cultural powerhouse. Theaters spring up on the South Bank, where the Puritan city fathers can't shut them down. The Globe opens in 1599. Shakespeare is writing his greatest works. Meanwhile, England is becoming a maritime power. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 proves it. English ships are exploring, trading, colonizing. The East India Company, chartered in 1600, will eventually make London the center of a global empire. Merchants grow fantastically wealthy. But London remains desperately vulnerable. The city is a fire waiting to happen. Timber buildings with thatched roofs, narrow streets, open flames everywhere. And then there's disease. 1665. The Great Plague returns. It starts in the slums of St. Giles, spreads rapidly. At the peak, thousands are dying weekly. Red crosses are painted on infected houses. Families are sealed inside to die together. The rich flee to country estates. The poor have nowhere to go. By winter, when cold weather finally kills off the fleas, approximately 100,000 Londoners are dead. 1 in 4. The city is still reeling when the next disaster strikes. September 2nd, 1666. A fire ignites in Thomas Farriner's bakery on Pudding Lane. It's been a scorching summer. The wooden buildings are bone dry. East winds are gusting. The fire spreads with terrifying speed. For 4 days, London burns. Entire neighborhoods vanish. The heat is so intense that the lead roof of St. Paul's Cathedral melts, pouring down the walls like water. When the flames finally die, the damage is staggering. 13,000 houses destroyed. 87 parish churches gone. The medieval heart of London is ash. Incredibly, only a handful of deaths are recorded. But 70,000 people are homeless. Christopher Wren proposes a radical redesign: wide boulevards, grand plazas, classical symmetry. It's a beautiful vision, and it's almost entirely rejected. Property rights are too tangled, reconstruction too urgent. London rebuilds on its medieval street plan. But there are changes. New regulations mandate brick and stone construction. No more thatch. The risk of another great fire is dramatically reduced. And Wren does get to rebuild St. Paul's Cathedral. His masterpiece, with its iconic dome, takes 35 years to finish. It defines London's skyline for centuries. The 18th century is London's Enlightenment era. Coffee houses become centers of intellectual life, places where ideas circulate freely. Lloyd's Coffee House evolves into Lloyd's of London. Jonathan's Coffee House becomes the stock exchange. London is the financial capital of an expanding empire. George III purchases Buckingham House in 1761 for his family. Westminster Bridge opens in 1750, finally giving London a second Thames crossing. More bridges follow. The city spreads north and south of the river. After Britain defeats Napoleon in 1815, London is the undisputed center of global commerce. Banks, trading companies, insurance firms. Wealth flows in from every corner of the empire. India, the Caribbean, Africa, Australia. London is where the money goes. Then comes industrialization, and London explodes. In 1801, London has 1 million residents. By 1851, it's 2.5 million. By 1901, 6.5 million. It's the largest city on Earth. The Victorians build on an unprecedented scale. Trafalgar Square, commemorating Nelson's naval victory, is completed in the 1840s. The Houses of Parliament rise in the 1850s after fire destroys the medieval palace. That Gothic revival architecture becomes synonymous with British power. The Great Exhibition of 1851 showcases Britain's industrial dominance. The Crystal Palace, a revolutionary structure of iron and glass in Hyde Park, attracts 6 million visitors. Infrastructure projects transform the city. Joseph Bazalgette's revolutionary sewer system, built after the Great Stink of 1858, when Thames pollution became unbearable, is still in use today. The Underground, the world's first subway, opens in 1863. Tower Bridge, an engineering triumph, is completed in 1894. But Victorian London is also a city of shocking inequality. The rich inhabit elegant squares in Mayfair. The poor are packed into disease-ridden tenements in the East End. Cholera outbreaks kill tens of thousands. It takes Dr. John Snow proving in 1854 that cholera spreads through contaminated water before reforms begin. Crime is endemic. Robert Peel establishes the Metropolitan Police in 1829, the first modern police force, but the city's dark side persists. In 1888, Jack the Ripper murders at least 5 women in Whitechapel. He's never identified. The case becomes a symbol of Victorian London's dangerous underworld. Charles Dickens captures it all in his novels. The stark contrast between empire and poverty, wealth and desperation, all compressed into one city. The First World War costs Britain hundreds of thousands of lives, but London's infrastructure survives intact. The Second World War brings war directly to civilian streets. The Blitz. From September 1940 to May 1941, German bombers target London relentlessly. Night after night, the sirens wail. Entire streets vanish. Tens of thousands die. St. Paul's Cathedral, surrounded by flames, somehow survives. Photographs of it standing defiant become symbols of British resistance. By war's end, over 1 million London buildings are damaged or destroyed. Post-war London is exhausted and broke. The empire is collapsing. India gains independence in 1947. Rationing continues into the 1950s. The Great Smog of 1952, caused by coal smoke and fog, kills 12,000 in 5 days. But London rebuilds. Again. The 1951 Festival of Britain signals renewal. Brutalist towers rise from bomb sites. Immigration transforms the city. The Windrush generation arrives from the Caribbean in 1948. Waves follow from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Africa. London becomes multicultural. The 1960s bring cultural explosion. Swinging London. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, fashion revolution. For a moment, London is the world's coolest city. The following decades are harder. Economic decline, strikes, IRA terrorism. By the 1980s, the docklands are abandoned ruins. Then comes regeneration. Canary Wharf rises from derelict docks. London reinvents itself as a global financial hub. The 21st century brings continued growth. The 2012 Olympics transform East London. The population passes 9 million. Modern London is defined by diversity. Over 300 languages are spoken. You can find communities from everywhere, food from anywhere. The skyline keeps evolving. The Shard, the Gherkin, gleaming glass towers next to ancient churches. It's controversial, constantly debated. But London has always been like this, changing, adapting, surviving. It survived Roman withdrawal, Viking raids, the Black Death, the Great Fire, 2 world wars. Each time, it rebuilds. Each time, it pulls in new people, new ideas. That's the pattern. 2,000 years of chaos, disaster, renewal. London is messy, overcrowded, expensive. It's been that way for millennia. But it endures. Thanks for watching. Making these videos takes extensive research and countless hours. It's a passion project condensing thousands of years into one narrative. If this journey through London's evolution resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more historical deep dives. Comment below with what city you'd like to see covered next. As always, we'll see you in the past.